Hello everyone, you're listening to the Eiffel Tower podcast. My name's Oliver G. This is a show all about Paris. And what do you think about when I say iconic Paris bookshop? Does it make you think about the Shakespeare and Company bookstore? Well, that is exactly where today's interview was recorded. That's what it's all about. And that's going to be the topic for the next half an hour. It's me and Adam Biles, an Englishman who is the events manager down at the bookshop. If in your mind you're thinking, do I know this bookshop? Of course you do. It's the one that is almost directly opposite the Notre Dame Cathedral. It features in movies like Midnight in Paris, Before Sunset. Of course you know it, you've probably been in there before. In any case, we're talking all about it. And in this conversation you'll hear a chat about the Tumbleweeds. You know, these are people who actually, writers who live there or spend time there at least. We talk about how the bookshop has been coping with the virus and the lockdown. We talk about some of Adam's favorite interviews with writers before. We talk about all kinds of stuff, and I hope you will enjoy it. If you got two free hands while you're listening, why not go on shakespeareandcompany.com? The link is in the show notes. But buy one of their books. If you're feeling like going particularly Parisian, I'm very excited to say that my own book, Paris on Air, is now available there to order online. There's a link in the show notes. Why not order it? Why not order a few? You'll understand why at the end. Help a local bookshop. But before we begin, and rather like one of those Russian romance, drama, huge, enormous Tolstoy kind of books, Dostoevsky, you know what I mean, with all the characters, I thought it would be smart to just list a few of the characters from history that Adam talks about. Because, Adam's in the bookshop and he knows them all on a first-name basis or refers to them on a first-name basis. But just to spell it out for everyone at home, Sylvia is Sylvia Whitman. That's the daughter of George Whitman. It's her who runs the shop with her partner in life as in business, David. George Whitman, who was her father, was the proprietor of Shakespeare and Company. He died in 2011. He opened the bookshop in 1951. Sylvia Beach, so also Sylvia, opened the previous Shakespeare and Company, and that was in 1919 at a different address. You with me? Excellent. That wasn't so hard, was it? Now, let's get into the episode. I'll be back at the end to chat with you a little bit. Here we go. Adam.
Oliver.
Nice to meet you. Although I believe we've met.
Yeah, I think our paths have crossed a few times at various events here at the bookstore.
Right, and now we're sitting here and it's closed off. Mm-hmm. This isn't normal.
No, but then what is normal at the moment? We're sitting in the reading library of the bookstore, which is on the first floor, or to American listeners, the second floor.
Yeah, I don't know. I know we're not on the ground floor.
We're not on the ground floor.
We've gone up some steps, okay.
And so this is the reading library. So in normal times, people would come here. This is George Whitman's private collection of books, and people are able to spend the day sitting, reading, just passing the time. At the moment, it's open if people want to come and visit it.
Right.
But just because of all of the changes with coronavirus and everything, we can't leave it open as we would like.
Sure. And I want to talk about this room at length at some point, but I think we should address what there it is, the elephant in the room. It sounds like renovation.
Yes.
Is that true?
It's true in a sense. So anyone who's visited the bookstore since the end of January this year would have seen the scaffolding sort of occupying the main space downstairs, because we have this project which was a dream actually of George Whitman's from the late 1960s to essentially expand the inner space. So there's a roof just over the main space in our fiction room, and the idea is to raise the roof and install a kind of a walkway around the edge. So from this level, you'll be able to see down into the bookstore. Those works started, and they started with a renovation of the walls of the interior courtyard.
And when you say the interior courtyard,
yes.
you mean inside the bookshop, or do you mean the bit to the...
So originally in this building, if you come into the bookstore, if people can picture, they walk into the bookstore and they're in the section which is our fiction section, so the main space inside the bookstore, the first main space you come to. That originally was the courtyard of the building, but at a certain point in the history of the bookstore, George Whitman was able to cover that over and bring that space inside the bookstore. So the internal courtyard is above the roof of the fiction section in the bookstore.
It sounds like quite an ambitious renovation.
Yes, it is. It was. I say it is. It was because at the moment we've had to press the pause button.
Sure.
On that, which is it's a shame because we have been. As I say, everyone who's come in since January has seen a little sketch that George got somebody to do when he had the idea, and it's not exactly as it was going to be, but it was giving a good representation of what we were hoping to achieve. But what with the current situation, I think, like businesses everywhere, we're having to reassess our priorities, to consolidate things, and to not to cancel these works, but to postpone them for, I guess, a year or two down the line.
I mean, that I suppose is the other elephant in the room, is this virus that's not taking any prisoners in Paris by the sounds of it. Or is it, what do you say, taking no prisoners? Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And you guys haven't escaped.
No, I mean, so we were closed for 2 months from the middle of March to the middle of May by order of the French government. It's an odd thing, particularly, I think, for this bookstore, because anybody who knows about the bookstore knows what a lively place it is. I mean, there's always people visiting. I mean, we have people from all over the world coming to see the bookstore, to explore it, to spend time in the reading library, to obviously to buy books. But on top of that, we also have our Tumbleweeds, and the Tumbleweeds are the young writers who live and sleep in the bookstore. And this is something which has been going since the bookstore opened in 1951. And so it's never not been occupied. And for 2 months, it was more or less empty. I mean,
wow. So I'm sure that there are people at home who don't know about this tumbleweed thing. I read about it, and I wondered how much of it was kind of almost myth, and how much people were regularly doing it. Can you walk it through for someone who maybe has no idea what you're talking about?
So the story goes, and I have no reason to doubt this, that on the very first night that George opened this bookstore, so in 1951, there was a young student with a backpack walking past, and he needed a place to stay. And George said, well, look, I've just opened this bookstore, you can sleep on the floor if you want. From that moment, young writers have been able to come and stay in the bookstore for free for more or less an unlimited time. I mean, we've had generally people stay a few weeks, sometimes a few months. A guy did stay for about 6 years. Back in
so they sleep on like these bits next to where we are?
Yeah, well, I mean, we have in this room we have one bed. There's another bed through there.
Right. Just
in the piano room, there's another bed.
Was it after 6 years were you guys like, come on, mate? That's...
Yeah, I mean, this guy, actually, for the 6 years, he ended up staying a lot of the time in what is now the antiquarian section.
Right.
But then, from what I understand, he suddenly inherited a whole load of money from a relative he didn't know he had, and was able to...
Is it him paying for the renovation?
We wish it were. I mean,
no.
That's one thing I think that sometimes people get a bit confused about with the bookstore, is that because I think it's on, it's I guess it has a certain reputation. People wonder if there's a foundation behind it, or if it has some sort of status. Whereas in fact, everything that happens in this bookstore is paid for through the sale of books.
Sure, and that's something we're going to get back on, how people at home can keep buying books even if they're abroad. But these tumbleweeds, they call themselves tumbleweeds still? Do they go,
yeah. I mean, so George called them tumbleweeds because, like those kind of things you see in like cowboy movies, things that kind of roll across the American plains. The idea is that sort of these young people, they roll in, maybe they snag on the bookstore for a week, a month, or whatever, and then they roll out again.
Yeah.
There are a few rules, which are: you have to read a book a day.
A whole book a day?
Yes, a whole book a day.
So they all start with like the small ones?
They read a lot more poetry and plays than than they normally would.
But you couldn't even start on one of the thick ones.
Well, I mean, that's one thing that that George used to say, was that, like, he always used to say, like, people say they don't have time to read. I don't understand that. I don't have time for anything else. And I think one of the things about this place is that you sort of, when you're in an environment, you're surrounded by people who love books, people who are talking about books, even if you're not a big reader before, you want to be a part of it, and it interests, it stokes the interest of people. So there's that. So read a book a day, help out around the shop for a couple of hours, like helping open the bookstore and close the bookstore, and then write a one-page biography, which we keep on record. So
about themselves.
Yeah.
Wow, that's cool.
So they leave a photo, they write or they type on one of our old typewriters a one-page biography.
And do you have lots of people applying for this?
Well, you can't really apply for it. You show up with a backpack. If there's space, then we'll do our best to accommodate.
It's so different. Like, I mean, it's really cool. Do you have people like? I don't think I'd try and do it, but would you have like a podcaster come in and do it?
One thing we do ask is like we try to avoid sort of journalists or people who want to write about it, because it is quite an intense experience. Sure. It's quite a sort of intimate experience for the people who do it. So the idea is we try and preserve a little bit of the magic about it.
Well, that adds to the mystique. I love it. That's cool.
But we estimate we've had around 30 to 35,000 tumbleweeds since 1951, and we've got about 15,000 of the biographies, because quite a few were lost in a fire in the 1990s. But yeah, we've got
such cool history here, and it's. I mean, I think I wrote in the email to you about what's happening under lockdown for Europe's favourite bookshop. Mm-hmm. Is that like something that you guys say, or is that? I mean, you can't. You can't say it. But is that? I mean, when it comes to bookshops in Europe, at least. One
thing I think we can say is that, like, I've been really, really struck by the amount of people during the last few months when we've been closed. The amount of people getting in touch, either friends of the bookstore, like writers, or people who've passed through over the years, former tumbleweeds, just getting in touch saying, are you guys okay? Is the bookshop going to be okay? If there's anything we can do to help. Or even people who were planning a trip to Paris and they'd never been to the bookstore. It was on their itinerary. Sure. Just getting in touch saying, they've seen, I don't know, a post we've done on Instagram or something. Yeah. And they've said, we're happy to see you guys staying positive, and can you, we look forward to when we can rearrange our trip. And the feeling that warmth is, has been one of the positive things to come out of all of this.
That's iconic status. That's what that is. How did you get to iconic status? And how much did Midnight in Paris play in that?
In a sense, I think the sort of Midnight in Paris and the Richard Linklater film, I always confuse the titles. Before Sunrise, After Sunset.
No one knows. Even Richard doesn't. The one where they come in here and he's reading at the beginning.
Exactly. Right? I mean, I think they've certainly done something to add to the sort of the reputation of the bookstore, the notoriety of it around the world. But I think before that, so obviously I think most people know that the name Shakespeare and Company started with Sylvia Beach. Mm-hmm. So she opened her Shakespeare and Company in not far from here, Rue de l'Odéon. Mm-hmm. In fact, she had one for a little bit just round the corner, Rue du Pitren, and then it went to Rue de l'Odéon. But 1919. And she's very much associated with the lost generation. So people like Gertrude Stein, James Joyce. She published Ulysses, Hemingway, Fitzgerald, and those kind of writers. She closed during the Second World War when she refused to sell a copy of Finnegan's Wake to a Nazi officer, and never reopened. So there was already a sort of an iconic sort of reputation there. Right. George opened this store in 1951. It was originally called Le Mistral. And Sylvia Beach was a friend of George's and a regular at the bookstore. And she always said that this bookstore was the sort of spiritual successor to her bookstore. And then she sort of presented George with a plaque, with the Shakespeare and Company guest house plaque. And then after she passed away, George changed the name to Shakespeare and Company to honour Sylvia Beach, and also to honour it was 400 years since Shakespeare's birth, I think, 1964. Right. But one thing that adds, I think, so to come back to your question about the sort of the iconic status, is whereas Sylvia Beach was very good friends with writers of the lost generation, George was much more associated with writers of the Beat generation. Right. So one of the reasons he set up the bookstore was that him and Lawrence Ferlinghetti were friends in Paris, and they both agreed to open bookstores. So George in Paris, Lawrence in San Francisco. So Lawrence went back and opened City Lights, published Allen Ginsberg. Ginsberg came over here, spent a lot of time in Paris. William Burroughs also wrote a lot of Naked Lunch here and gave the first public reading from it.
Wow.
So I think there's sort of those sort of associations.
What do you feel like if there's the Lost and the Beat generation, like over the past 20, 30 years, is there something that stands out for you? That'll be remembered?
I mean, I don't think we really do generations.
Maybe we just don't
much.
know. Do you think it has to be named afterwards or something like that?
I don't know. I think the Lost generation, the Beat generation, I think they were very good at branding themselves as well. Like I think these kind of groups of writers,
right.
They sort of if you can give yourself a name, you can kind of give your friends a leg up.
Wasn't it Gertrude Stein that named the Lost Generation?
Exactly.
We need like John Baxter to name. I bet he could do it.
Oh, I mean, John is a man of many talents, but I don't think there's been a sort of coalescence in that way in the last sort of 20 or 30 years. I think one thing that I think has been really positive in that time is sort of the exposure given to writers of colour, to women writers, to work in translation, all of which was really neglected for such a long time, and just sort of you like here you notice the sort of the vibrancy of the literary world now that that these voices have sort of fought their way through and are finally getting at least some of the recognition that they deserve.
And how long have you been here?
At the bookstore, 4.5 years.
Right.
And I started just in November 2015, actually, just before the Bataclan attacks.
That's a hectic.
It was a bit of a crazy time, but also just before the COP21 climate conference, where we had Naomi Klein as a guest.
Wow.
She was our first guest after the attacks, actually, and it was. I remember Sylvia saying it was one of the moments she suddenly thought, okay, there's a sense of like, oh, the bookstore can breathe again. Like Paris is gonna get past this. It's gonna get through it. But but I've been in Paris more than 15 years now.
Right, that's a lifer. Once you're over 5 years, I think that's.
Oh yeah.
What about like you? For people who maybe think they recognise your voice, you do a lot of the chats. The interviews, the conversations.
Exactly.
Are there authors who've really stood out? I mean, of course there are. Silly question, but who has stood out? I
mean, you probably know this as an interviewer, like. When you're interviewing somebody, you know when somebody is saying something that they've trotted out time and time again. You know, they've done the book tour. Yeah. They kind of anticipate the questions they're going to get, and they they know what works, and so they use it, and that's fine. I'm not criticizing it, but as an interviewer,
you can criticize it. It's all right.
No, but as an interviewer, because it works for the audience.
Sure, that's true.
But as an interviewer, it's just you don't get that same connection.
Yeah.
But when you get these writers, and there's a handful of them, just off the top of my head, I mean, people like John Berger, for example, Rachel Cusk, George Saunders, Valeria Luiselli. They sit there, you ask them a question, they think about the question, and then they respond to it in a sort of not in a sort of a pre-thought sort of way, but they're talking to you and they're answering your question. That for me is a sort of it's unbeatable. That sort of that moment of connection, I guess. When
I agree with you. Yeah, because sometimes you can feel that politicians do it a lot. Is when they've practiced something so much, or for an author, they've written their book, and then they're on the tour, and then they feel the job's kind of done. Like they've written the book and it's ready to go. They just got to answer your questions and people will buy the book. And then I agree, some people will. When someone has these trotted out lines, I interrupt them. Like I once had someone on this show who came with notes. And I was like, no, it doesn't.
I don't know if you found this, because before I did this, I was a language teacher for quite a few years, And one thing I think, particularly when you're teaching French people to speak English, you have to get used to long, uncomfortable silences. And I realised quite quickly when I was interviewing people that, particularly the ones who have their sort of pre-cooked answer, let them give the pre-cooked answer, and then just don't say anything, and then chances are they will get uncomfortable with the silence before you do, and then fill it with
the murder confession.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I find that's been quite a. I know I don't want to sort of, showing sort of behind the curtain, but I found that sort of a technique, let's say, which has served well. Over
I think a little
years.
Behind the curtain's all right on the Eiffel Tower.
Okay.
It's a bit Louis Theroux, the documentary maker, does a lot of that, just waiting.
Mm-hmm.
And he says as well, it's a good interview technique. That's great. And I was just thinking, Adam, a lot of these names of authors and even Louis Theroux, all these names, I'm going to put them in the show notes because there might be some people who've not heard of some of the authors before. But let's talk a little bit about, just quickly while I think about it, we're really close to the Notre Dame. There's maybe some people listening who've never pictured where we are on the map. This is, you say it's, what is it, kilometer zero?
Yes, yeah.
Because how far is it to the, I can see it.
Almost a literal stone's throw, I reckon. If you're better at throwing than I am, you could probably do it.
A good stone throw from the Notre Dame.
Yeah, I mean, kilometre zero is, or at least was, I don't know if they still use it, a sort of an official French government measure of where all of the distances in France were measured from, and it was essentially just in front of Notre Dame, sort of
right.
dead
I think
centre.
There's still something there.
There might be,
like a little thing on the, we can't see now because it's closed.
Right.
But I did want to ask how, I mean, that's so close here. When that burned over a year ago, that must have been pretty devastating for everyone who looks at it every day.
It's insane. I mean, as happens to a lot of things in my life, I kind of feel like I just missed out on the dramatic event itself. So
right.
I'd left work about half an hour before. I was walking home, and then suddenly my phone exploded with messages from people saying that the cathedral was on fire. But I remember two things really distinctly from that time. One was following the news that evening, and then there was a moment where I can't remember, it might have been the chief of police or it might have been Macron, I don't know, who said, we don't know if we're going to be able to save any of it. And that was the first moment I thought, oh God, imagine like I'll come in the following day and just look out from the window of the bookstore and just see nothing or just see rubble. And I remember feeling quite sick at that point. Just, God, there's something quite horrible. And then coming in that morning, and obviously the bridges were full because everyone was trying to see it, and the sense almost of relief of seeing the burnt out, battered skeleton still more or less there was quite a profound feeling. And I remember talking with Sylvia about it. We were standing just in front of the bookstore, looking over towards it, and she said, like, this, sort of, it's almost like somebody told you, like, the moon had sort of split in two or something like that. It's sort of, it's such a part of the landscape. You just imagine it's going to be there unchanged forever, which actually isn't the case. Like when you read a little bit about the history of Notre Dame, you see how it was kind of, it's been knocked down and rebuilt and added to and things like that over the years. But still, your experience of it as a monument, it's a sort of something permanent and inviolable. And
it's I was thinking about it the other day because I walked past and I was thinking, if you were to compare it to like a family member, it'd be like your elderly grandparent who's, I don't know, having a serious, I don't know, heart attack or coughing fit or something, and you're like, hang on, this person's been here forever. I can't fathom what's going on. And I think I know what you were talking about. I think it was the chief of the fire who said that, and that was just that moment, like, it doesn't, you can't get your head around it, right? Just a strange time.
And we're actually, I mean, this was all done before it's been knocked off schedule, obviously, by the closure and everything, but we have just published a little pamphlet of poetry about Notre Dame, which actually unfolds into a beautiful poster of a photo that was taken of Notre Dame back in, I think, the late 19th century of an asteroid flying, asteroid in the sky over Notre Dame, which we're going to be selling to raise money for the Paris Fire Brigade and like the sort of the first responders to the crisis.
I'll obviously link to all that stuff. But speaking of helping out and raising money and that sort of stuff, there are probably a lot of listeners around the world right now thinking, gosh, I wouldn't mind a book from Shakespeare and Company right now. And we need to tell them if that's possible or not.
It is possible. It is. It's been sort of a little bit difficult getting things going again, because obviously we get deliveries of books from the UK, from the US, and they are starting up again, but slowly. But yeah, as of last week, so May the 11th, we are able to take orders for books on our website again, to ship orders more or less all over the world. And of course, if anyone is within 100 kilometres of Paris, because I think that's the legal limit for how much we're able to travel at the moment, then they can come and visit the bookstore as well, and the cafe too.
So the cafe is open as well?
The cafe is, yeah. I mean, the one thing to say, if anybody is thinking to come and visit over the next few weeks, the hours are in constant flux because, we have seen most of our public vanish because it's not, there's tourists obviously, but it's not just the tourists, it's the students, the overseas students, but also the French students, they've all been sent home.
Wow.
And so, there's the expat community here who've been wonderful, and they're starting to come back, but obviously they have their other priorities too. So sort of, I think it was kind of almost the perfect storm of of sort of constituencies to just kind of scatter to the wind. But as I said sort of at the start, like, we've received so many messages from people sort of saying, so being so disappointed they can't visit the bookstore. And so we're trying to get the bookstore to people.
Sure.
Anyway, and that was always the thing, like when we launched the website 5 years ago, the idea, we're part of the sort of independent bookstore community, and we want people to support their local indie bookstores because they're suffering as much as we are, as much as every business all over the world is. But if people want something, a little bit of Paris, if you want a little bit of taste of Shakespeare and Company, it's not just a book, but we have our Shakespeare and Company stamp, which goes in the book. We even have this French perfume made by this company, friends of ours actually, Astier de Villatte, which you can have your package sort of spritzed with this perfume if you want a little whiff of Paris.
The smell of France when you open it up.
Absolutely.
Is that the smell of France though?
It's one of the smells of France.
You couldn't really do the smell of the metro. I don't know if people...
No. I mean, well, you probably could, but people wouldn't.
It depends what line metro, I suppose, as well.
And there's also like obviously all the Shakespeare and Company tote bags and our coffee cup and things like that. So we would love it if people ordered from us. But I guess the thing is to say is sort of support your local indie bookstore. But after you've supported your local indie bookstore, if you're looking for if you want to bring a little bit of Paris to you, then ShakespeareandCompany.com is the place.
It's
to
the
go
place
for
to
that.
go. Get a bit of Paris on your bookshelf. It's perfect time for armchair travel as well.
Exactly, and that's one thing. I mean, from my perspective of the sort of events as well. Obviously, I don't know when I'll be able to welcome people into the bookstore again for that, because you've been to events, how everyone is
That's true.
Packed in for them. So social distancing, I think we'd be able to fit about 7 people.
That's an interesting thought as well. Because you really do put the chairs quite close together, which is part of the charm of it as well. But
so we're looking into ways. Like I'm going to keep the podcast going.
Shout out to the podcast. What's the name of it?
Shakespeare and Company.
There you go. And that's where you put the chats from the evenings.
We've got archives, like hundreds of interviews with all of the writers I mentioned earlier. We've got a wonderful one from a couple of years ago with Zadie Smith and Nick Laird together, for example. Don DeLillo from back in 2016.
Wonderful.
And I'm going to try and keep that going, because obviously not only have bookstores suffered, but imagine being a writer who's had a book published in the last couple of months.
Hey, you're looking at one.
Well, there you go, right? So getting it into bookstores, getting it into people's hands is really, really hard. So I'm hoping with at least the first few podcasts, doing some interviews with writers, obviously remotely, trying to figure out the technical side of that. But then, of giving a bit of publicity to these people who would normally have come to the bookstore and done an event, or gone on a book tour or whatever.
It's a strange time for us all, but let's finish on something positive.
Sure.
And unfortunately, you can't answer this by saying when the bookshop is full again with people.
Mm-hmm.
But what's something you're especially looking forward to? It can be personally, if you want, but when things are way back to normal.
Wow.
In Paris, mind you.
I mean, there's so many things I've realised since the week that we've been out of confinement that I realised that I missed so much. So I was out with my partner the weekend walking along the canal just up where we live, and just not being able to stop at a terrace, sit down, have a glass of beer. Just sort of that. I suppose it's that closeness, actually, whether it be the sort of, having 50 people packed in for an event downstairs, whether it be people being kind of rammed into a Parisian sort of basement bar or something like that.
Jazz bars around here.
Exactly, like that physical proximity to other people without having to worry what if you might contaminate them, if they might contaminate you, if you might get into trouble just for being near people. I guess that's maybe a bit too general a sort of thing to look forward to.
No, I think it's just that proximity, human closeness, brushing arms on the dance floor.
Yeah. And between the aisles of the bookstore.
Yeah,
well.
I knew we had to come back to that, obviously. Okay, well, thank you, Adam, for being on my show, and I also look forward to people being back in here again in droves. But mostly, everybody, you heard it. Get online right now and order your favorite book, or even your second favorite book, or any old book, and get it sent from here. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
So there you have it. Once again, shakespeareandcompany.com. The link's in the show notes if you want to buy. I put the link to everything we mentioned, including the Notre Dame poetry book, my book, Paris on Air, which you can get from there. Isn't that cool? My book is in Shakespeare and Company. I haven't seen it on the shelves yet because I gave it to them. I gave them 5 copies and walked out. But I want to go back and see, or even better, I want to know that you guys have all bought a copy and they need to restock it. So shakespeareandcompany.com. As for other news, life is slowly getting back to normal in Paris. I've been staying in one of the Paris Perfect apartments, which you probably heard about in the last episode. I'm right by the base of the Eiffel Tower, which has been such an interesting experience because I've never seen the 7th arrondissement without tourists. So imagine walking around the Champ de Mars Park behind the Eiffel. Imagine walking along the Seine, and it's just Parisian voices you hear. It's kind of weird. It's kind of interesting. So I'm going to talk a lot more about that. If you're a member on Patreon, patreon.com/the Eiffel Tower, if you help support this show and make it better, I'm happy to say that on Tuesday, in the morning and in the evening, I'll be doing 2 really long live stream walks along this incredible empty Paris streets of the 7th arrondissement. 2 walks so everyone at home, no matter where you are, can watch it. But you'll need to be a member first. That's how this show survives. Patreon.com/the Eiffel Tower. Help me keep making it better. And I'll see you on Tuesday for those walks. Otherwise, I'll see you for another episode before too long. Merci beaucoup. Thanks for listening. Have a lovely week. Au revoir.